What if African countries reject Western democracy? Will it lead to chaos or will things change? Since President Traore came to power, many, especially those that are pro-West, have criticized his leadership simply because he came into power through a coup. They say that he is an authoritarian leader who was not chosen by the people and who has suppressed free speech. These people say this as if democracy is the perfect form of governance. However, in a recent speech, Traore said something interesting. He said that, if we have to say it loud and clear here, we are not in a democracy, we are in revolution, popular progressive. This statement was said without mincing words, and it reflects how Traore sees his leadership in Burkina Faso. But is revolution what Burkina Faso truly needs? Or should the country return to democracy? Let's find out. On April 1st, 2025, Burkina Faso's military government celebrated the occasion of the ceremony of rising colors. It was during this ceremony that President Traore gave a remarkable speech that continues to ring in the hearts of many. Firstly, Traore started by admonishing all the ministers and senior officers working with him to run the country. He told them that given that the first quarter of the year has come to an end, he expected them to have reviewed their performance for the first quarter, including all that they had been able to accomplish, and set goals for the second quarter. This goes to show how focused and goal-oriented Traore is. We have heard some people say that Traore is a military man and does not know anything about leading a country. But that is absolutely ridiculous. First of all, there are many countries, including in the West, whose leaders came into power through a coup and then transitioned into a civilian leader after holding an election. The current military leader of Gabon is even about to do the same thing. Secondly, leadership doesn't have anything to do with whether one is in the military or not. The current president of the US was a businessman before he became president. Before we proceed, here is a reminder to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel so that you can get more videos like this. The fact is that a leader can be raised from anywhere, but not all leaders are the same. While there are those who only think about themselves and what they would gain from their offices, there are other leaders that have a goal and would do everything in their power to achieve that goal. The latter is the type of leader Traore is, as he has proven it over and over again. Traore's ultimate goal is to see Burkina Faso free from the chaos of insecurity and free from the shackles of poverty and underdevelopment. This is why he is very strict in his leadership. Every action he takes to ensure that he achieves his ultimate goal. But not everyone is happy with his actions because some of them are changing the status quo. However, this is why Traore had to come out and remind everyone that Burkina Faso is in a revolution. In his own words, if we have to say it loud and clear here, we are not in a democracy, we are in revolution, popular progressive. He went on to add, everyone has to understand this. It is also more surprising that those who are supposed to be intellectuals who went to school can imagine that a country can develop in democracy. It is wrong. That we are located in a single country that has developed into democracy, it is not possible. Democracy is only the culmination, argues Captain Ibrahim Traore. To reach this achievement, he suggested, we are necessarily going through a revolution, and we are indeed in revolution. Those who had not yet understood it, we still say it loud and clear, hammered the president. These are very strong statements from President Traore. According to him, there is no country that can develop in democracy. Now, people might want to argue, but if you think about it deeply, it is very true. For African countries that are still struggling under decades of neocolonialism, poverty, and underdevelopment, and a system that has made them dependent on the West, if anything is going to change, then a revolution needs to happen. You see, African countries have been practicing democracy for decades, but what progress have been made? Absolutely nothing. As Traore said, democracy is the culmination. This simply means democracy can only be practiced after a revolution has taken place. Take a look at the history of big countries like the US. These countries started with a revolution. Strong leaders stood up to take the helm of government and change how things were done. If there is no individual that presents himself as a strong leader, ready to do what is necessary, the people would only have a choice to pick weak leaders. Every country that would undergo a change must go through a revolution. Take a look at Rwanda. After Belgium made a mess out of it, it took a strong leader like Paul Kagame to stand up and fight for the control of the country. In Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara stood up and made important reforms to change the status quo. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela stood up to fight against the apartheid regime. These people were not chosen by the people to fight. They made the decision to fight for their country, and when the people saw their efforts, the people supported them. That is true leadership, and it is what Traore means when he said that Burkina Faso is in a revolution, not a democracy. Revolution means a drastic change and turnaround, and if that is to happen, it would take one man who is ready to take hard decisions. Of course, he would be criticized by many, but as long as he is focused on his goals, he would be able to achieve them. If you check through history, anytime a great change occurs in a country, it is usually not peaceful. In fact, people end up dying. The leader might be assassinated or imprisoned. Revolutions are not peaceful, but at the end of the day, it brings the desired changes. So Burkina Faso is in a revolution and not a democracy. President Traore also said, "Our role of communicating, explaining, making people understand what our revolution is, we will continue to play it." So this question of democracy or debauchery of action or expression has no place. As much as you think you are free to speak and act, the other is also free to speak and act as well, and there we are leading to a society of disorder. This again is another strong statement. In a democracy, there is freedom of expression and all that. However, according to Traore, people should only be free to speak and act well so that the society would not be in disorder. Those who are supporters of democracy would say that this is suppression of human rights. But the fact is that every society has laws, rules, and regulations. As much as there is freedom of rights, there are certain things that people are not allowed to do in society. So in truth, there is no true freedom. Everyone is bound by laws and rules. This is what Traore is emphasizing. As much as people are allowed to act and speak, people should make sure they do it well. Now, the reason why Traore highlighted this is because there are those who have said that Traore is suppressing free speech and shutting down dissenters. If you recall, some weeks ago, Traore's administration arrested some Burkinabe journalists. Besides this, Traore has also shut down several French and Western media in Burkina Faso. Some have seen these moves as suppression of free speech. However, according to Traore, he would not entertain any media that romanticizes the jihadists and criticize the efforts put in by the military to solve the problem. For some, this is free speech. But how is this any different from what other Western countries like the US have done? Earlier this year, the US wanted to shut down TikTok simply because they wanted to control the information received by Americans. Last year, the US shut down RT and other African media platforms for a ridiculous reason. However, no one batted an eye when it happened. The fact is, just like the US, President Traore is simply protecting his people from the influence of those who do not mean well. Interestingly, Thomas Sankara was also accused of the same thing. They said he suppressed free speech too and shut down his opposers. This was how they turned the people of Burkina Faso against him and killed him. Traore knows how this works, and that is what he intends to avoid. Now, unlike what most people think, democracy is not the best form of governance and is not suitable for every country. This is because each country has their traditions, rules, and ideas. But in the quest to have their ideas and principles dominate the world, Western leaders have pushed and brainwashed the world to think that democracy is the best. While in theory it might have been, the truth is that in practice there is no true form of democracy. Today, how many countries can truly say that the people's choice was elected? These politicians actually lobby for their positions. They bribe and use their positions to secure even greater positions. Mind you, this doesn't just happen in Africa, it happens everywhere, including in the West. So when President Biden was asked if the president of China was a dictator, and his answer was yes, we disagreed. You see, according to Biden, any country that doesn't practice its form of government democracy is a dictatorship. But that's nonsense. China is ruled by a dictator, as they said, yet it has the largest economy in the world, even though they say that it is the US. During the TikTok supposed ban period, Americans who switched to Red Note, a Chinese social media app, could confirm that everything their government had told them about China was a lie. The US government said that the Chinese people were oppressed and their rights, including freedom of speech, have been eroded. However, when they communicated with the Chinese, they found no evidence of that. Just because in the US there was no order and people could act as they liked, doesn't mean other countries didn't have order and rules that people ought to follow. In fact, Americans discovered that the Chinese, who were supposedly oppressed by their government, were living a much better life economically and socially than those who have freedom to do whatever they liked. Think about it. What is more important, freedom of free speech or a better society with a good economy, good security, and high standard of living? We are sure that if you ask any African, they would tell you the second. What use is the freedom of free speech if the majority of the citizens are scared of their lives because of insurgency and insecurity? What use is freedom of free speech when more than half of the people cannot enjoy good food and clean water? What use is freedom of free speech when insurgents and terrorist groups who kill and destroy also have freedom of free speech? These groups have social media pages and websites where they express their thoughts, recruit people, and show the world the evil they have committed. Doesn't that sound crazy? This is all because of democracy and freedom of rights. In Africa, democracy has been practiced for decades after independence, but what has the continent got to show for it? Nothing but corruption, low level of development, insecurity, civil war, and political instability. We see presidents who ought to step down after their term, going again and again and again for another term with ease because they tweaked the Constitution to allow them to do so. We see the African masses getting leaders who they did not vote for because the candidate rigged the election. That's the democracy in Africa, and yet every time an election is successfully carried out, the West applauds another success story to their call for democracy, regardless of whether or not the winner was the people's choice. When independence came in 1960, bringing an end to around 75 years of colonial rule by Britain, France, and Belgium, the newly created African nation-states practiced a one-party system of government where only a single political party ran the government. There was nothing like the multi-party system that is practiced in most African countries currently. This system, however, was regarded as an authoritarian regime by the West, who expected the African newly formed state to easily slip into the democratic form of government, despite the fact that the foundation they laid during the colonial period was an authoritarian government. However, African revolutionaries such as Julius Nyerere of Tanzania maintained that the one-party system was suitable for African countries because it was akin to the African traditional societies. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana even said that the multi-party system was divisive and hence unfit for the newly independent African states, which needed a unified energy and enthusiasm so as to move forward. But then the problem was, this single-party system easily slipped into an authoritative regime that marginalized smaller tribes. This was the state of African countries until the end of the Cold War, which brought an end to communism. Following the end of the Soviet Union, the West began questioning the competence of these African autocrats, pointing out their economic failures. Dragged down by global economic shocks and domestic policy failures, from the 1970s, Africa was falling behind the rest of the world in terms of development. But what were they expecting when the continent just came out from more than half a century of colonization? According to the dictionary, democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So this means it's the citizens who should choose who leads them right. But that's not what we see in Africa. In Africa, the leaders intimidate and bribe to get voters to vote in their favor, or they even threaten to punish those who vote for the opposite party. They bribe or threaten the leaders of the body responsible for carrying out the election so that they can work it in their favor. Some of them even deliberately send thugs to election centers to disrupt the election process. The fact is, most of the leaders who end up as leaders of African nations were not chosen by the African people. They were imposed on them. The elections are never free and fair. The 2023 general election held in Nigeria is a perfect example of this. If you ask the majority of Nigerians who they wanted and voted for president, they would say, Peter Obi from the Labour Party, but who eventually became president, Bola Tinubu, the candidate with so much money and influence to bribe whoever he needed to win. In Africa, democracy has been such that once a presidential candidate wins an election, he becomes all-powerful. They can remove and appoint anyone they like, even if the person is not competent for the job. It's one of the reasons why development has stalled in the continent. In addition, democracy has allowed an elected leader to use power and the state machinery to advance the economic interests of his ethnic group and exclude all others. This is the reason why virtually all civil wars in Africa started. The interesting thing is, the West has observed all this that has been happening. Yet for them, as long as a nation conducts an election and there is a winner, then they are practicing democracy. This means democracy is all about elections. Whether or not there is development, it doesn't matter. This means the West has an ulterior motive for why they are pushing for democracy in Africa. We believe that the reason is that it will be much easier for them to influence and make the leaders puppet than if it were to be any other form of government, such as the one practiced by China. The fact is, while democracy has its merits and has worked for other Western and European countries, it has not worked in Africa and is not suitable because Africa is a traditional society that believes in the collective and community. This is opposite the Western society, whose basic unit is the individual. Before the advent of colonialism, Africa had strong institutions that outlived even the strongest of men. Such strong institutions could be found in the Oyo Empire, the Ashanti Empire, Hausa Fulani Empire, Bini Kingdom, and the Ghana Empire. In fact, even today, in certain cultures and regions where the pre-colonial traditional institutions have been preserved, there are strong institutions that no strong man can overpower yet, for example, the Bini Kingdom. If you observe these traditional political systems, you would note that Africa practiced its own kind of democracy that suited the respective cultures and traditions, and Africans flourished under them. For example, the Ashanti Empire was a federal republic, the Igbo political system was a republican democracy, and the Oromo people of Ethiopia practiced an indigenous democratic system that allowed the people to elect their leaders through a Gada voting system. This means that the problem started when Europe divided the continent into colonies and then lumped different ethnic groups with different traditions and political institutions together to form one nation. The West then expects that these different ethnic groups try and live together under one person that would be chosen from only one ethnic group. Why wouldn't democracy fail? Imagine Nigeria with its 250 ethnic groups and different religions is expected to be democratic. The fact is that it simply cannot. What African countries need is their own system of government based on the existing traditional system. Africa needs to go back to its roots. The continent has depended on the West for solutions to government, security, and economic challenges, yet this has never yielded fruit. Think about it. Does this mean it is time for Africa to solve its own challenges by itself? They say that it is insanity to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. This is why Captain Ibrahim Traore is doing something different, and we advise that other countries follow suit. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and share.